יהיו לרצון אמרתי בהגיון ליבי, יהיו לרצון אמרתי בהגיון ליבי לפניך.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is so wonderful to be with all you. I don't get to do these that often, so I'm really excited to be with you this afternoon. One, to be with the Washington Hebrew Literary Club, Women of Washington Hebrew Literary Club, excuse me, but also really excited to have a conversation with Sara Glass, who wrote this awesome book, Kissing Girls on Shabbat. So welcome, everyone. If you don't know me yet, I'm Rabbi Eliana Fischel of Washington Hebrew. I am just excited to be in conversation with you all as well today. Right off the bat, we would like to thank the Jewish Book Council for making today possible. Thank God for all they do to keep us literate in the Jewish world and to make sure that we are hearing from wonderful Jewish authors like Sara. I'd also like to thank Bonnie Youngentaub and Mara Brick, our co-chairs of the Women of Washington Hebrew Literary Club book programs, for putting this together and making sure that we have wonderful authors and wonderful books to read and wonderful authors to hear from. If you have yet to read Kissing Girls on Shabbat, which I imagine perhaps that's why some of you are here, you can purchase that through our mitzvah mall, which I think means that like Washington Hebrew gets a donation or something. I don't really understand what it means, but there you go. There's the link in the chat for you to purchase this wonderful book, either now or after you've been wowed by Sara. And I think that's all of my logistics. How this is going to go today is I'll do a little introduction. Sara, I have some questions for Sara, and then we're going to open it up to all of you for questions. So I realize that usually I think the protocol here is that you all would type in the chat to me your questions. But in talking to Sara, she really wants to hear from you and wants this to be a dialogue and to hear your voice. And if you did read any of the book, you know that she's going to share everything. And it's one of the amazing things of this book is like no detail is left unturned. And so really any question is fair game. As Sara and I talked about, we both believe that like no question should be offensive. Or no question is offensive, and like if we think you shouldn't ask it to other people, we'll tell you that it might be offensive to other people. But certainly all is fair game to ask Sara as well. So that is the plan for today. We are recording our program this afternoon, and that will be ready to send out. Ira, I think, is on the call who does that. It'll be ready to send out probably, I don't want to give him a deadline, but probably by tomorrow. He's very quick on it. So I wanted to start off with like a little Jewish because I can't help myself as a rabbi, to sort of frame us in a Jewish way. In this week's Torah portion, it's called Chaye Sara, which is actually kind of wild. Chaye Sara, which literally means the life of Sara. And it begins actually with Sara, our matriarch's death. And the way that her life is written out is it says that Sara had 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. And our commentators go kind of wild with like, why doesn't it just say 127 years? Like, why does it repeat the years again and again? And what one of our commentator says is because actually our lives are not just one whole unit, that there are chapters of our lives. And Sara was a different person when she was 7 than when she was 20 than when she was 100, in the same way that all of us have different chapters and ways to sort of identify aspects of our life and chapters of our life. In reading Kissing Girls on Shabbat, which when Sara and I met, I said, it's really a fun read. And then I apologized that her pain was fun to me. But it is really fun and interesting read. I was really struck by the different chapters, Sara, of your life, and how, my God, how distinct they are as like different worlds from one another. And so I am just really honored that you have given us the gift of writing out those chapters, both literally and figuratively, in this book, and also spending your time with us today. So for those who don't know, Dr. Sara Glass has a PhD and is also a social worker. She's a therapist, writer, and speaker who helps members of the queer community and individuals who have survived trauma to live bold, honest, and proud lives. She lives in Manhattan, New York, with her 3 children. You can find out more about her in that professional career at drsaraglass.com. And her memoir, which we're going to be speaking about today, Kissing Girls on Shabbat, inspires all women and anyone oppressed to trust their own heart, recognize their worth, and dare to love and live according to their truth. So to start us off, Sara, I was wondering if you could just share. I think there are many people, or many people from your community, from the Hasidic community, who tend to make their way out. We're going to talk about that later, but not everyone writes a memoir about it. So what inspired or motivated you to write this book, and who did you write it for?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me and for the wonderful introduction. I'm so glad to hear a piece of Torah today. And through Jewish Book Council to be and through people in my life now, to be introduced to these wonderful like versions of Judaism that I did not have access to growing up. It just made me even more proud to be Jewish. So I started writing the book in 2018, about a year after I left the community and moved to Manhattan. And I wrote the book because I moved to Manhattan from Long Island, but before that, I was in Borough Park, Brooklyn, in the Hasidic section of Brooklyn. And when I moved to the city, to my free life, I was just 11 miles away from where my siblings were still raising their families in Hasidic Brooklyn. I Google mapped it because it felt like so far from where I was, but it was just 11 miles away. And I knew that my nieces and nephews were still getting arranged married at 17 or 18 years old, that there were still queer individuals in the community thinking they needed to force themselves to get married. And I had this survivor's guilt, like I was out living a free life with my children, and I couldn't do that and fully enjoy it without having some impact on those who were still there. And I knew that as a therapist, I could speak about the ideas of freedom and the ideas of self-determination, but I knew that it would be more impactful through story. And so I wrote that story for everybody who's stuck in any closet of any kind, everybody who's hiding some part of themselves, and for little me, who could have really used a book like this back when I was there.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Um, you just described this chapter of your life as your free life.
Yeah.
And you like said it so nonchalantly, just like that's what you call it. It's your free life. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how your growing up in your like small extreme branch of Hasidism was not free for you, and what that felt like, and then also, I mean, so many people just stay in identities and in situations in which they feel like they can't get out no matter what it is, right? But in your situation you did. And so what actually from this not free life, what gave you the bravery and the strength to leave?
Okay, absolutely.
It's like a little question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got this. I was born in Hasidic Borough Park, like I said. My father wore a big fur hat, and he was the kind of Hasidic that wore his pants tucked into his black knee socks. When I was in high school, I would sometimes like steal his knee socks because they were more comfortable than the nylon stockings I was supposed to wear. My mother wore a wig and clothing up to collarbone, past her elbow, long skirts, tights. We were a post-Holocaust generation. And so our entire community, the Ger sect of Hasidim, we were like slightly traumatized and neurotic, like many Jews, but we had this extra layer of fear of the outside world, which included us having restrictions on media. We had no TV, no screens. The only tape we had it was like the 80s, was like a 613 Torah Avenue tape that we could put in our tape recorder, and it had a few songs about Torah stories. No magazines, no secular literature. We were only exposed to Judaic literature and to Holocaust stories. I went to an all-girls school in a long pleated skirt and white and button-up Oxford shirt. And they taught us that we were to get married. We were supposed to get married to a boy from one of like the boys' schools on different blocks in Borough Park, a boy that would be chosen for us when we were 17 or 18, or if we were really old and unlucky, 19. And then we were supposed to have children. And I thought it was a good idea because I really thought like that was the path to heaven. That was the way to go to the next world and to be pure, to do what God wanted us to do. The other way, like the hell way, they described to us in great detail. Like one of the stories I was raised with was this story about a girl who wore skirts without stockings underneath. And so, as punishment in her town, they would pin her skirt with big clothespins, like safety pins, to her actual flesh
Mm.
and drag her around, like attached to a cart on the back of a horse. And I was like told that that's what would happen in the afterlife if I was immodest. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. That sounds horrific. So I'll just do whatever I'm supposed to do. And if that meant marrying a boy, it meant marrying a boy. I didn't understand like what that would entail. And the other issue was I just kept falling in love with girls. At 15, I fell in love with the girl, and I wrote a New York Times modern love piece about that relationship. We didn't really know what to call it. It was very closeted. It was just like all secretive. And then I prayed. I prayed a lot and I fasted some days. And I beat my hand against my chest, my fist, and I was like, just take this away from me, God. This is not going to work. At 19, I still like hadn't found a good match. I was one of the older ones. My family had some problems and it was hard to set me up. And I met this girl who walked into my classroom where I was a teacher, and I just immediately felt this connection with her. And we ended up sneaking around for a few months. She would like creep up the carpeted stairs in my house into my bedroom while my parents were sleeping. And we would have intimate moments, skin on skin. We just couldn't stop wanting to be together. Um, but we were both still dating for marriage because that's what we were going to do. And so I finally did get set up with someone who was 26 years old from a good family. They seemed, parents were still married, seemed like a good reputation. And I ended up marrying this man I was set up with and breaking up with my girlfriend, who was someone who really saw me. She was the only person who really I was vulnerable with and real with at the time. I remember her saying to me at one point, like we were together, and she said, your eyes get lighter when you're happy.
Mhm.
She was the only person who ever saw my eyes that light. And then I got married off at 19, didn't really know what was happening. And I remember looking at pictures of like the post-wedding, weeks after the wedding, and I can just see my eyes going dead and dark.
Mhm.
Um, and that's where the book begins, with that scene, you know. And then the question you had is like, what gave me the courage to leave? And we can go into it like in more detail, but I will say really briefly, I had two children very quickly, a son and then a daughter, 15 months apart, because I wasn't allowed to use birth control. And so when my son was 6 months old, I got pregnant with my daughter. And my children gave me the courage to leave. They're the reason why I do everything I do up until this day.
Yeah. Um, I actually wanted to talk about, I think your daughter's younger, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and there was that the bodily autonomy comes up a lot in the book. And there's the scene of, I think it's her birth, where you are not given Pitocin, even though that seems to be the thing that you should have. I'm wondering if you could, so particularly as someone who is 22 weeks pregnant, as I was reading this, I was like, my whole body was hurting me, as you were not getting the care that you wanted to receive. Can you talk about that scene a little bit? How it felt for your body to not be yours in that moment or in other moments, and maybe how you like celebrate or maybe still struggle with bodily autonomy today?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that's such a poignant, like, scene, I had already given up my rights to my body at that point by the time I gave birth to my daughter. As soon as I got married, I thought, like, my body now belongs to God,
Mm,
and I'll do whatever I'm supposed to do, whatever God wants me to do, which I learned 2 days before my wedding. Like, I learned what it meant to have sex with a man. I had no idea what that was until just before then. And at that point, I was like, okay, this is what God wants me to do. This is what I'll do. If you're here listening, and I know, trigger warning, like, sorry, I didn't give you a trigger warning before. We're going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about love. We'll talk about heartbreak, and we'll talk about trauma. And if these are hard things for you to hear, like, please do take care of yourself. And if this feels overwhelming, it's okay to mute me, like to log off. I don't want to create more trauma. I just want to be candid, in the hopes that that can be helpful to someone somewhere in some way. So now that that's in, I'll go in on the trauma.
thank you. Thank you for saying that.
So at when I gave birth to my daughter, I was like, I entered the hospital. Okay, picture this. I'm in like a Monmouth County near Lakewood, New Jersey, like another very large Orthodox enclave hospital. And I walk in and I'm in a tichel, like a headscarf, full long black skirt, long sleeves, with this husband who's sort of like shuffling around holding like something he was learning, and didn't want to be in the birth room with me for fear that my headscarf would slip back and he may see a strand of my hair. And so he was in the waiting room and I was in the birthing room, and it was my second birth. And I said, this time I'm getting an epidural. Like, I was like, my life is hard enough. Done. I need an epidural this time.
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah. Who's giving birth with assistance and painkillers. It's okay. We're doing enough. So I get the epidural and I'm strapped to this table. I have a catheter, and they say, like, after a couple of hours, your labor has slowed. It was like 11 p.m. You need to have this Pitocin so that your contractions don't slow while your epidural is still in effect. You have the painkiller, so we need to keep the labor moving. And I was trained to ask my husband for permission for everything. And so he was called in from the waiting room, shuffled in, still holding his Talmud. And I said, we need to add Pitocin. And he said, well, we need to ask the rabbi. He said, it was more like, we should call the rabbi, but he's sleeping probably, so we'll call him in the morning. And so for the next 8 hours, I labored on and off as the epidural wore off and the contractions got worse. And that was a rough moment. I thought I was doing, again, like what I was supposed to do, but it started to feel so unsafe for me and the baby, and so scary and so lonely for all those hours. And I did give birth to a healthy little girl, and she was 5 pounds, 11 ounces. But that feeling of losing, like, control, it never really left me. And so having like a child, a daughter, it was when I started having nightmares. I had this little tiny baby girl, and I started having nightmares about her having the same life that I had. And I wanted to have her raised in the path of God, but I also was so scared for her, to grow up and live like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that moment was just so stark. And I think often when we think about bodily autonomy and consent, it's all around sex. And of course, these are the byproducts of sex, but you don't think about what it means for your physical health and safety when you're in a hospital setting. And that just felt really stark to me, and particularly for those of us who have given birth, you already don't feel in control in that moment. And then for that to be put upon you even more, just
Yeah.
felt so difficult.
I mean, another layer of that is just like something I think about now that I'm getting to go out in the world and talk to other people who are like about the story, is just the way I was looked at because of what I was wearing. immediately when I walked into the hospital, I could tell they were seeing me as other instead
Mm-hmm.
and treating me with less choice and like less, these almost took a hands-off approach. Like, this is what the rabbi said, that's fine. And I almost wish that the doctors and nurses had seen past the garb,
Mm-hmm.
actually like sat down and looked me in the eye and talked to me about what these options meant and what it would entail. And
Yeah.
he offered to talk with my husband too. And so, you know, just I think a lesson for all of us when we see anyone in any kind of garb, to just try to look past like the hat they're wearing or the scarf they're wearing and see the
Mhm.
human underneath. Make
Absolutely.
contact. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That labeling meant that you didn't have support on either end, which seems wildly unfair. Um, Speaking of support, mental health also comes through a lot, and clearly you've now dedicated your life to that field. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how mental health issues or support are handled in the Hasidic community and why you decided to go into this field once you got into your free life. And actually, before your free life, you were even thinking about being in this field.
I'm in my like office near Columbus Circle with
Nice.
my degrees on the wall, which is a freaking miracle that I got here.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable, because I did have to get so much rabbinic permission to go to college. But I knew I wanted to be a therapist from the time I was 7 years old. I have a sister who had bipolar disorder. And when I was 7, she had her first inpatient hospitalization, but no one would talk about it. I mean, I don't know how many families have secrets. I'm sure so many people here can relate. She just disappeared. And we were taken one time to visit her in a hospital, but it was like there were no machines hooked up to her. There were pictures on the wall. I didn't really know what was happening. My mom took me to a psychologist at that point, and I thought was a terrible psychologist. I was 7. I assessed the situation. I was like, you're giving me dumb toys. You're telling my mother everything I told you. This is really, really like not smart. Can't you see that I'm not feeling that safe with my mother, you know? And I thought to myself, kids need better than this. They
Mm.
need someone better. And here's like the other half of my office is play therapy equipment, sand play therapy, because I
Nice,
can't
beautiful.
do that now. I get kids come in here and they can tell me how they really feel most of the time, I hope. And so I held on to that dream, and I asked my rabbi when I was in like like my year of Israel, can I go to college and become a therapist? And he was like, you know, you're so pious, you're so good. I think you can handle getting a PhD. You'll go out there, you won't get influence, you'll come back, bring it back to us. When I married my husband, my very even more extra pious husband, he spoke to his rabbi, and the hierarchy of it is like me, my rabbi, him, his rabbi, God. And his rabbi said, she just needs a social work degree. That's enough. I wasn't actually in that conversation, but they decided. And so I went to Rutgers in New Jersey to get a social work degree. And I'm going to tell you my pregnant rabbi story now, just because I
Please.
usually say it. It's not even in the book. But, you know, for this audience that knows you, I feel like we should get a little comic relief in the trauma. So I go to Rutgers, and okay, it's a state university. So like there are dorm buildings. Everyone is wearing what I think are pajamas. I'm again in a wig.
They are pajamas. They are just for record. They're all wearing pajamas. Yeah.
Like they say pink down the leg or fish, and they're like, they look like they rolled out of bed. I'm in like full garb, 2 diamond ring, like diamond and a wedding band, tights, ballet flats, 20 years old. I already had my son. He was 8 weeks old.
Mm.
And I entered my master's program in social work. And I get onto campus and I realize like I'm going to need to pump milk for my son because I was breastfeeding. And I thought, let me find the Jews, they'll help me. So I went to the Hillel house on campus, and this girl, like I think her name is Yakira, because I had never heard that name before. she's at the front desk and she goes, "Oh, you need to pump? The rabbi can help you." And I'm like, that's a little uncomfortable. You know, I'm picturing a rabbi that's maybe a little more modern than the rabbis I knew who were like all in black and white and hats. I'm like, maybe this rabbi wears like a V-neck sweater, you know, maybe he has a wife and she wears pants, but like, okay, if he can help me find a room to pump, that's fine. So she takes me upstairs and walks me into this room. And this sweet woman puts her hand out for me to shake. I'd never done that either. And her name was Rabbi Esther at the Hillel House. And she introduced herself, and I was just flabbergasted. I just like put a limp hand back out. And she's like, "I'm pumping too. I just had a baby. Here's a room where you can pump," and like set me up, found like a private space, beautiful space. And I went home that day and I just told my friends and family, I shook hands with the rabbi today. And they were like, you've lost it. You've officially lost it. So that was just like a little
Oh,
picture of my first amazing female rabbi experience.
yes. That's where it just like proves to me why we need more and more female rabbis. Like more rabbis should say like, I'm pumping too, and we should all hang out, and here's this beautiful space for you to do this in, as opposed to a closet, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, and they were so nice. I'm like, I had been taught these people who weren't Orthodox were like, not good people, really. They were cheating the system or something. But I'm like, here's this rabbi who's so sweet. Like, it made me start to get that germinating question inside. Like, maybe there's another way.
Yeah.
And so I went to Rutgers and got a great education, like in social work. I also learned about the world. I learned that people can eat a turkey and cheese sandwich. Like I saw someone do that and I was like, damn, you're just going right in. You're taking that, but you didn't even wash your hands. You're just going to bite. I learned that people who wore jeans could also be really kind and that they were even kind to me and accepting of me. And like so thoughtful. Like when I had to take off class for the holidays, they were like sharing their notes. My classmates, my Muslim classmate shared her notes with me. We interviewed each other. So that helped me with like some of my preconceptions about that. I learned that gay people were celebrated in some spaces and supported, and that not everyone was a Republican. And I also learned some things about being a therapist. And so I did end up with a social work degree and some questions, but still like devout and pious on the outside. And then it was like much later after like I left that husband that I was able to go back and do a PhD in psychology.
Beautiful. It's amazing how much like the idea that you could possibly go onto a campus and like just learn what's going to happen in class and not be influenced by anything else around you is like such a wild, different version of what college at least is taught to me, right? Was taught to me, right? As like this whole life-changing society, basically. Yeah, for sure. So I wanted you talked about that you would have to take off days, obviously, for holidays, and clearly Judaism defined your entire life for that first chapter of your life of like from what you were to what you ate to all of to whether or not you got medicine. And now you are in your free life, as you say. What does your relationship to Judaism look like now, spiritually or theologically or behaviorally in terms of holiday and things like that? Does it play a role, or is it sort of like that's part of that past life and it doesn't really play a role for you anymore?
Well, I mean, we're right in line with the college story. And so I'll tell you a little bit. I mean, I'll give you a little bit of like a spoiler alert, but you won't know like until you read the book how exactly this happened. But like miracle of miracles, my children are in college. Those little young babies I had in the community are now in college. And I just got back from Charleston 2 days ago from visiting my daughter in her dorm where she wears pajamas.
Full circle, full circle.
Yeah. Like, Mom, to get more pants from Aerie because, you know, this is basically what I'm wearing, these sweats all day. I'm like, great, Jordan, we'll get you whatever you want. I'm so
Mhm.
happy she's living that life. And my son is at college and they're just, I'm so proud of them. They read an early copy of my book and they got so into it. My daughter asked me to cross out the sex scenes. I did. So she still has, I went to visit her and like one of her roommates has the advanced early copy with the crossed out sex scenes. They're
That's
all
awesome.
so cute.
That's really sweet.
So she's at one point reading it and she comes busting out of her bedroom and she goes like, Mom, you had a pink Coach bag. Where is it? And I'm like, Jordan, that was like 2009. And then she goes, okay, don't spoil anything else. And I was like, guys, the spoiler alert is we're here.
Right, like you know how it ends. You're part of it. Yeah.
We live in the city.
Yeah.
You're going to college. Like, we're okay. That's the end. So, you know, if you like go on my social media and you can see a lot more about me and my kids on Instagram, you'll see like we're okay. We made it out. And so my daughter and son both got to college and found the Hillel and Chabad houses.
Mm.
And that I think is the biggest achievement of my leaving is having raised them in a way where we still love being Jews.
Mm.
And they wear their Jewish stars proudly. And my son is at Columbia, which we know is a complicated, you know, campus. He insists on wearing his star out proudly.
Mhm.
And my daughter as well. And it helped them make friends with other Jewish kids. And they feel so connected because in our home we have like Judaism by choice. Before every holiday, well, we used to say like before they left, how do you want to celebrate this one? And for Hanukkah, it was like, okay, we're gonna pick 3 nights and order from 3 different donut places.
Great way to celebrate Hanukkah.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Them apart, share the donuts. So they went to a pluralistic Jewish high school in Manhattan, Heschel, which is a
Right.
wonderful high school. Like love they and we've instilled it. We've instilled the love, and so that makes me so happy and so proud.
Yeah. And also, I mean, as you said, like they're choosing it, which is amazing, right? It's unbelievable. Um, cool. Um, so I'm just checking our time and how many more of my many questions from you and from me and from some of our literary club I want to do before we get to another one. So maybe I'll ask one more question, and this is like a heads up to our crew out there, that in a little bit you can, after that question, you can raise your hand and I will call on you to ask some other questions and be in dialogue with Sarah, which I know is a slightly different setup than usual. Usually we write in the chat, but I think Sarah would love to actually hear your voice and hear your question. So, as a therapist, as we just talked about, an advocate for the queer community, we are now in a time when I think we always sort of knew we lived in a religious country, and that religiosity is getting more and more entwined into our law and into our legal system and into our society, with the rising tide of conservatism and anti-Semitism. Do you worry about the rights for your queer community around same-sex marriage, maybe around adoption, in the same way that we were worried and now are seeing the end of Roe v. Wade?
Yeah. Okay, I'll talk about this. There will be two completely different responses to this for me personally versus like my queer clients. I work with many queer clients. I'm also the clinical supervisor for Jewish queer youth, which is like we host drop-in centers for teens and young adults in Manhattan and surrounding areas who are raised Orthodox and need a safe space where they can be queer. We're hearing a lot of fear around like what is happening in our country, especially for my trans clients. We see like the rise of anti-trans litigation just doubling and tripling by the year. And what's hard for me to see is clients who are trying to like grapple with maybe leaving the Orthodox community or coming out as trans within the Orthodox community if they feel safe to. And they're sort of looking at the outside world of America and saying, we're not safe here,
Mm.
we're also not safe there. And just sort of feeling hopeless, that's the most painful thing for me to watch. It just hurts my heart.
Yeah.
Clients right now just like trying to renew their passports, get their name changes done really quickly before like potentially those rights could be cut off. And so for my queer community, like I do worry. I worry for everyone. Interestingly, for myself, I actually am not that afraid.
Mm.
And that's because the world I was raised in was so much more uber restrictive than I think America will ever be.
Mhm.
That for me, it's like, I know that I can wear pants and I could be a doctor. I know I could probably in New York kiss my girlfriend and there'll be no repercussions and like nothing bad will happen to me. My family won't be like, not, I'm done with that part.
Yeah.
And so it's already like so much more, so many more standard deviations away from how I was raised that I
Mhm.
actually like it doesn't hit me personally as hard, as it may hit.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't feel like going backwards in a way that I think it might for others. I know for our community, we've already been, I have already done a civil marriage in the time since the election to now to just make sure that they can be civilly married before the marriage in a year. And bunch of other couples are reaching out as well to make sure that that can happen legally and without fuss before anything else. And like similarly, right, like I don't think it can be taken away, and yet of course I'm gonna marry these couples, right? Yeah. So would love to reach open it up to anyone else who has a question. If you want to raise your Zoom hand, if you know how to do that, or actually raise your actual hand, and I'll be coming through and looking for any questions.
Sara, thank you so much for being here. I started the book yesterday, and I'm all but like 75 pages through. So if you've answered this in the book, I apologize. But I am curious, given the way that you moved from the community, how did your first husband, you had this kind of ironclad portion of your divorce agreement. How did that all work out so that you were able to live your life in the free world and yet keep custody of your children?
Thanks,
Yeah.
Sara.
So when I was 24 and I wanted to leave my first husband, I needed to get a Jewish divorce because I still hoped, to be on that path toward heaven. And you know that, like you may know that there's a power dynamic with the get process in Orthodox communities where the man holds all the power and he can decide whether or not to grant his wife a halachic Jewish legal divorce. And I was going to just do whatever I needed to do to get that divorce. I needed to be like out of that marriage at that point. One of my husband's conditions were you need to promise to raise the children to the strictest of Orthodox law. And he enumerated, like according to the 613 commandments, plus these extra books of law. Otherwise, you immediately lose custody, like give up custody of my children to him. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I was not going to lose my children. That's something I was certain of. And if that meant acting Orthodox for the rest of their until their adulthood, I was going to do that. And so I signed it. I was all alone. Like I didn't have any family support. And I was like, I'm just going to sign it. And through the whole book, the following 10 years, you see me struggling to maintain the conditions of that contract, like kind of sneaking out of the community at night and going to bars and clubs and then coming back and putting the wig back on, trying to live and also trying to keep my kids. And then ultimately, and I won't give away what like absolutely happens, but I will tell you it was a very like litigious process. I had to wait those 10 years because it took me that amount of time to get my PhD and the amount of resources it costs to hire the team of attorneys required for me to get out of that contract and not lose my kids. And even then, it felt so touch and go. Like I was a PhD psychologist who had raised my kids up until the ages of 13 and 11 when I wanted to move to the city. And I still was in terror that the courts would take them from me because of the contract, and it was terrifying. A harrowing few months. I tried to do some mediation with their father, and he would say things like, these kids don't have to go to school that prepares them for college. Many people just have like pizza stores and they make a lot of money. They could just do that, And then he tried to barter, like, you could have the daughter, I'll take the son. You could have her in a school that would prepare her for college, but I'll keep him in yeshiva where he won't get past a second grade reading level. But I wasn't going to barter, and I wasn't going to give up any of my kids. And so there was like a very tense court situation that'll be in the last section of the book.
Thank God it worked out the way we know it worked out. So
Yeah.
Lori.
I'm going to try to be succinct, but I am such a fan. Sara, your story was brave. You are a gifted storyteller, and I loved it. And I've made myself familiar with your website, so I have a sense of how you're paying it forward or giving back in your practice. But what I wanted to ask about was very selfish. I find great comfort and resilience and strength in community. And I wonder if you have found that. It doesn't have to be like we are blessed with amazing clergy and a very progressive temple, but it doesn't have to be in a synagogue. How have you met your spiritual or religious needs? I have a more clear sense of how you've met your psychological needs and your therapeutic needs.
Thank you. That was such a great, beautifully phrased question. And I'm just going to give you an extremely candid response. So book 2 with me making a lot of mistakes with my newfound freedom. And I'm not proud of it. I'm still like, I hope through writing book 2, I can forgive myself for developing an addiction when I moved to the city and lost my whole community and everyone I knew. But that is what happened. I had some time of like making bad choices and being in New York, like in the gay scene, and thinking the way to do that was to use drugs and alcohol. In the last few years, I have gotten sober in New York, and there's a beautiful sobriety community here. There's so much AA out here. It's like you can go on an app and find a meeting at any time. Walking into a 12-step meeting, I realized that I was using because I missed my community, and I missed home, and I missed having people, and I missed God. Like I missed having a connection to a God. But when I walked into AA, I felt like that was the first time there were people who just cared about me for no reason and who were willing to offer me any kind of spiritual pipeline that felt accessible to me. And so I'm an active part of sobriety in New York. And that's where I found this way of just being around some of the best people, and even so to my great shock, rediscovering a connection to a higher power.
I was going to say AA is such a spiritual and religious community. And how and I was going to ask actually, like, is that part of it, or do you just like say no?
Well, at the beginning, I thought I was cheating the system because I told my sponsor, like, I'm not going to do God. I can't do God. but if I must choose a higher power, can I choose neuroscience?
That's awesome.
She was like, sure. Would like she was just like, great, whatever. And then like after a while, I'm like, maybe there is someone out there caring.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. That was such an amazingly open and helpful answer. It makes me feel better equipped to support others who have these challenges.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks for the question, Lori. Emily.
I'm only halfway through the book and really enjoying it, and such a combination of being amazed by you, but sorry that you have gone through the struggle you had. And I don't know if this is in the book, but what is your relationship now like with your sisters and your nieces and nephews? And are they involved with your children at all?
So it's not that much. There's a little bit of that in the epilogue, you know. So I do have a connection with one sister's children. We're very close. They're a not religious segment of the family. And in writing the book, I didn't think that I had this wish, but I now realize I had this little kid wish that the sisters I had who raised me would read the book and begin to understand. When I left the community, when I left my second husband, they just stopped engaging with me. They felt like I was doing something really dangerous. I was sacrificing my kids' health and happiness and spiritual futures by leaving him. I didn't even get to come out of the closet to them because were already lost connection. And I thought like maybe they'll read the book and they'll call me and say, we're so sorry. We didn't realize what you went through and we love you. And it's months later now, and I've learned since that they haven't read the book. I still hold on to that wish. I think all of us who've never had a parent who loved us the way we needed to be loved, we always wish for that. Or if we have a partner who's not able to fulfill our needs in the way, we all like hope and wish for love. I also am not going to push it with them, with my sisters, because I am an out proud lesbian with multiple tattoos. And for me to show up in their communities, I know it could put their families' reputations at risk. And so in a way, like out of love and respect, I don't ever want to make them feel like I'm invading on the lives they're trying to build.
Thank you. It's hard.
That's unbelievably compassionate for people who did not show you a ton of compassion. That's unbelievable. Any other questions? Yeah, Linda.
How do you retain your love for Judaism while at the same time having to leave your community? I find that so inspiring.
I mean, thank you. Like, I was a therapist within the Orthodox Jewish community. And so I love my clients. Like, I just really love my clients, always have loved my clients. It's in the book. I wrote a letter to clients at the back of the book. I got to see the humanity underneath the system. And I always thought the best part of Judaism was the Jews, and that some people mess it up, like, and create controlling systems out of fear or out of ego. But if we're looking at the individuals and those who've created better systems, that's what inspires me. The other day, my son was arrested at a protest a couple of months ago before he left to college. And we're in New York and, he got arrested in his Jewish star and everything, my poor Victor. before he even made it to the police station downtown, I had phone calls from multiple people in his high school, like friend group, connecting me with attorneys. Just saying, we heard what happened. Here's a lawyer. We got it. And then the like head of the ADL was my son's direct, Jonathan Greenblatt, you know, his friends with my son. So he's like, okay, what can the ADL do for you? We're here. That's what the Jewish people do for one another. My daughter in her first semester of college ended up in the hospital in Charleston for like an issue related to her health that we couldn't predict. And her roommates were sweet and they called me and they made sure she was okay. Her Jewish friends were there 20 minutes later. The second they heard she was in the hospital, they hopped in an Uber, you know? And I feel like that's just something as Jews we're raised with. It's like someone's in trouble, you don't think, you just run, you go.
Yeah.
And I've experienced so much Jewish like community everywhere that I've engaged with the Jewish people. Even when my book came out, you know, Jewish Book Council is sponsoring me on a book tour. So it's the people.
Mhm.
That's the answer.
Absolutely. There was a question about when will book number 2 be published?
I hope to have this proposal turned in the next couple of months. I think it's an
Nice.
important project. America loves the before and after. We want to see you made it from here to there. Now you're great. But there's a messy middle. And I'm a trauma therapist. And I feel like as a trauma therapist, I need to be open about what it really takes to heal from trauma. And so I'm excited about this project.
Yeah, I also think that America might like the before and after. I think Jews really like the middle. We like the wilderness. It's much more interesting and much more identity defining. And so would really be looking forward to hearing that from you. You touched on this a bit, but I do I do know from my mother, who told me about you, that she was on the board of an organization called Footsteps that helps people who want to leave the Orthodox community to leave, and that you, I guess, spoke for them. She raved about you, loves you. But wondering, you mentioned at the beginning of our time together that you wrote the book for people who might need it in the community. I'm wondering if you have helped anyone else leave and what that might be like for you.
Oh, that's such a great story. I get daily messages in my DMs, daily from people. Like the other day, someone messaged me and said, I think I'm gay. I'm about to get forced into a marriage, but I just read your book and you're giving me the first bit of hope that there's another possibility.
Oh my goodness.
One day, like this man reached out to me over email and he said, I heard you wrote a book. Where can I buy it off you? I don't know where to get it. And I thought he was joking. So I just directed him to he's like, I can't have it in my house, or I don't know I can't order it to my house. And I said, you can go to get it on Audible. And he emailed me back and said, I don't have a smartphone. I guess he was emailing me from an internet cafe. They have that in Hasidic communities. And so I said, there's bookstores like Barnes and Noble and the Strand. And I was like, I didn't know if he was for real. But then a day later, he emailed me a picture of himself in his black hat and black coat holding my book. And he said, thank you. I didn't know about Barnes and Noble.
Oh my God.
And now he sends me his thoughts on part 1 and part 2 and how it relates, So I've just been so fortunate to have this platform and to have people be able to find me and say even just to send me a message. I get messages saying, here's a picture of me and my secret girlfriend. No one knows, but they send it to me because they need to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah, you get to play witness for them, which is such an important role to play. Unbelievable.
And showing people that you can get out and be okay. Even if it's a little messy, I think just me choosing to exist out loud, I hope provide some hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I have one last question for you that maybe we'll close out on. But before we do that, 'cause it's always nicer to end on like substance than logistics. Just want to say one more time a big thank you to the Jewish Book Council and to Bonnie and to Mara for making this possible, and for the Women of Washington Hebrews Literary Club. One more time, if you want to get Kissing Girls on Shabbat, I just put another link in the chat. That if you use that link, it goes through our mitzvah mall, where Washington Hebrew can get a little something too, I believe. And I just so hope that you continue to enjoy the book, or start the book and enjoy it on your own. And Sara, I'm wondering if you could leave us with, like, if you wanted us to have one takeaway from your book, or one takeaway from our time together this afternoon. I think sometimes like we can leave this and feel really great, but then be like, someone is like, so what did they talk about? And you're like, a lot. So what would be the one takeaway you would want to leave us with?
Okay, I'm gonna steal your method and do 2 logistics and then a takeaway, if that's okay.
Perfect, wonderful.
Okay, for anybody who does read the book, I would love for you to even just throw a sentence on Amazon, Goodreads, or Audible if you're listening. I narrated it in my own voice, so I'm proud of the Audible, if it's easier for you to listen. Because those words really, really, really help the book get to the people who need it the most. And that's just what I'm out here trying to do. Like this mission of helping people get uncloseted and feel safe to do so. And 2, same if you want to follow me on Instagram. I'm most active on there, or Facebook, or X, or Threads, or YouTube. It's all at Dr. Sara Glass. And you can, like, if you feel comfortable to share some things, it also helps get the message out there to everyone who's still stuck. And my message to you is this: we all have things that we're afraid to say out loud. I hear that a lot in my office. People sit here and say, I can't tell my husband that, how I really feel about our intimate life, or what I think he can do better, or I can't tell my boss I need a day off before I spontaneously combust. I can't say that I think I may not believe in this aspect of religiosity. I can't say that I might be gay or trans. We all have things we're afraid to say. It could be something so little or so big. And my message to you is to think that thing out loud in your own mind. Think it. Don't shove it down. Just for 1 minute, say to yourself, yeah, I actually don't like this job. I'm having this relationship is going to need some work. My friend needs some boundaries. Whatever the thing is, say it out loud to yourself, because that's the first step into being a little bit more able to live into your own truth.
Beautiful. Well, Sara, you practice what you preach. I think the what really so stood out to me from your book and your story is just how authentic and true you were to say exactly what you were thinking and when, and to share all of these details about your life and to share them with the world in order to make sure that others can be inspired to be as brave and as strong as you have been and continue to be. And so just thank you, not just for articulating the message, and also for exhibiting the message and exactly who you are. So thank you for the book, and also thank you for your story.
This has been such a great group. What a great way to spend an hour. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Agreed. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday.